All right, everyone, we have a lot of philosophy to talk about today and a lot of politics, actually. No live stream, of course, because it's a weekend day. I wanted to talk about how perfection requires imperfection. Look at the wall hang right over there, for example. It's perfect. It's highly aesthetic. It's also unbalanced. When you look at it, the contraposition of the actual things that are in the image, it's a Japanese art style. It's an aesthetic sort of thing. For instance, one of the ducks is centered. The other one is off-center. The branch overhanging is kind of centered. One of the flowers is in the center. The other ones are off on the side. And the idea is that that creates an aesthetic, a vibe, so to speak. And I happen to agree with this. I've got, I don't even know how many of these Japanese wall hangs, but it's literally an artistic style. I wish that modern architecture would follow this. When you look at, for instance, Art Nouveau uses asymmetry to create a form of symmetry, so to speak. I carry this over into the philosophical realm, and I think that a person is perfect when they're imperfect. If they don't have any flaws, so they're perfectly symmetrical, everything about them is perfect, it becomes bland, it becomes boring. Basically what you end up with is suburbia. You end up with, cookie cutter houses in architecture, cookie cutter people, everyone expected to be the same. It's almost communistic when you really think about it. The fact that people are different and that art forms are different and that there's messiness in the world, that chaos actually creates a form of order. Asymmetry generating symmetry. Likewise, perfect symmetry can generate asymmetry. It's a very interesting topic. Now, there are exceptions, of course. If you're talking about rocket science, or you're talking about nuclear engineering or something like that, you've got to be pretty symmetrical, pretty calculated when you're doing that. There are certain ways that you can do it, and there are certain ways you can. Chemistry, for example, medicine. If you're involved with inorganic medicine, the formula has to be correct, otherwise, people get less of an effect, or maybe they overdose and they die, or something like that. Outside of the realm of the more perfected sciences, though, when we're talking about the abstract, places where people live, the homes in which they dwell in, their personalities, art, music, things like that, a little bit of imperfection is good. We see no better example, I think, for example, within music, actually, than the return of the vinyl record. The scratchiness and the slight imperfection of the sound of vinyl is actually comforting. It makes it more aesthetic, actually. The coldness of the CD era, or maybe the MP3 era, or something like that, actually detracts from the musical experience. This is why people go to live shows. No live performance, unless they're lip-syncing and stuff, is actually following along with the original song. The original song is more cold and steely and things like that. When you go to the live show, the dude on stage, maybe he coughs, maybe they play one wrong chord. It makes it more of an experience. It makes it actually more aesthetic. It makes it more perfect. This is the case for all artistic forms. Paintings, for example. Hyper-photorealistic paintings are not as aesthetic as things like Romanticism, Impressionism, Pointillism. So those are some of my favorites, by the way. Paintings from the Renaissance, they weren't photorealistic. We look at medieval art, for example. It's very two-dimensional. It's different from, a photograph, of course. But we still consider it aesthetic now, don't we? Well, some people do. It depends on what art forms you like. While I like photorealism, I also like a little bit of that aesthetic. This is why I like the development of AI, and one thing, I have a bitch about Grok, for example, on Twitter, or X, as you would call it now. The last generation of Grok could generate all sorts of crazy shit. It was never photorealistic, or you had to really tool it in order to make it photorealistic, but you could generate pretty much anything. Now it's all photorealism. Like, you can make cartoon versions of things if you prompt it properly, but other than that, you're getting photorealism. Like, I generated images the other day And I said like a picture of Styx Hexenhammer 666. Now if I put that in the old grok, I would get pictures of myself. And I could say wearing sunglasses and a leather jacket, casting magic and sitting in a swamp next to some toadstools or something. And it wouldn't be photorealistic, but it would generate the image. Now if I were to do that, I end up seeing things that look nothing like me. It's very, very strange. Apparently I've been kicked off of Grok's algorithm. I don't really know. Now I have to use Joey Ramone or a gothic John Lennon as a stand-in. It's a little bit of a problem. People like the aesthetic of imperfection. There's a reason why the Japanese perfected that art form literally probably over 1,000 years ago. I've got wall hangs all around me. None of them have a perfected sort of symmetry to them. They're all technically, they display imperfection in order to create a perfect image, if that makes any sense. All of them. It's literally one of the sacred truths of their art forms. There's a reason why I like that aesthetic. The fact that the world is messy and chaotic brings life to the world. For example, let's say we lived in a world. Nobody suffered, nobody died, etc., etc. Humans would simply become decadent. They would never compete, so there'd be no advancement. They'd be living in the Stone Age. There'd be no reason to advance. This is the reason why people under stress in certain climates of the world develop faster technologically. They had to. This has created a better world for those people living in it. If they were literally living in a Garden of Eden sort of situation, everything's symmetrical, everything is perfect, there'd be no competition, there'd be no advancement. Think about gardening, one of my fortes. If you have a garden which is perfectly linear, perfectly designed, everything is absolutely spaced perfectly in tight rows and everything else, is that aesthetic? Well, if you have a vast area to do it in and you have different colors and shit like that, it's very aesthetic from the sky. But on the ground, it's kind of boring, actually. This is why in my garden I've deliberately added a little bit of chaos. Like I have the Viking garden, I have uneven bricks and things like that, because it looks better. It simply looks better. It may not be as efficient, but efficiency isn't the only thing in the world now, is it? Efficiency is great if you're growing commercially. And of course, that's why, again, you have those long rows and things like that, and they're perfectly even. But if you're doing hobby gardening, it makes more sense to make a cottage garden. It looks better. It's still functional. It's still efficient. It's also healthier for the soil, by the way. It simply looks better. Having worms, and rotting wood and stuff like that, these are healthy for the garden. They're healthy for the aesthetic. They're also healthy for the crops, by the way. It's just you can't commercially scale it, generally speaking. Same is true in art. Same is true in music. Same is true in architecture. We've gotten to the point where everything is made to be as efficient as possible, but we lose the aesthetic in the process. You look at the modern slab buildings that are being put up, for example. They're doing that out of necessity because the population boom in certain parts of the world, so they have no choice. But it's not aesthetic. It's not aesthetically pleasing. The Dutch understand this, by the way. They're building a shit ton of slab buildings as well, mostly medium density housing. So how do they do that? They break it up by using different colored bricks, a little bit of a different aesthetic, different sized windows and stuff in those slab buildings to at least create the illusion of that imperfection that actually makes them more aesthetic. That's about all. Peace out.